Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With fishingbooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. Fishingbooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to fishingbooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Spring Black Friday is on at the Home Depot. Save on grills and patio sets that will be sure to bring your hosting game up a notch. Fire up your feast with help from the Home Depot and save on grills. Like the Next Grill 4-burner propane gas grill was $249, now in special buy for $199. Or give everyone the best seat in the yard with the Hampton Bay Mayfield Park 4-piece conversation set for only $399. Save on grills and patio sets with low prices guaranteed during Spring Black Friday only at the Home Depot. Now through April 22nd while supplies last. Exclusions apply. See homedepot.com/price match for details.
Before refrigeration, before freezers, before any kind of modern preservation, there was air, sun, and time. Across the world, people figured out that if you could remove moisture from food, you could keep it for weeks, months, and sometimes even years. Meat became lighter, fish became shelf-stable, mushrooms became something entirely different, more concentrated, more intense, and maybe, most importantly, food became portable. Today, we're talking about drying and dehydrating, one of the oldest food preservation techniques on Earth. And we'll discuss how it still fits into the modern wild food lifestyle.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Welcome back to our little wild pantry. In the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about a lot. We talked about curing and salting, and we talked a bit about freezing. And curing was mostly about controlling microbes, and freezing was about hitting pause. Drying's a little different. It's kind of like the third pillar. So instead of controlling or pausing, you're removing the things microbes need entirely. That's water. No water means no life. So let's start with where this shows up historically. Adam?
Yes, this is probably the most universal preservation method that we talked about so far. You really see drying everywhere in, indigenous North America with pemmican, the Andes with charqui, Scandinavia with stockfish, biltong in Africa, dried fish and mushrooms all across Asia. And these all developed independently, but they all kind of landed on the same idea, which is if you remove water, your food is going to last much longer. It wasn't all just about preservation. It was also about mobility. Drying made food lighter, more compact, easier to carry, and last longer, meaning that hunters, traders, and entire cultures eventually depended on it. Food was able to be brought with nomadic people. It was dried and made lighter so it can be moved around by traders, and that really shaped how humans moved around the world. In a lot of cases, drying didn't just preserve that food, it also actually improved it. So mushrooms are a great obvious example. Fresh mushrooms are delicious, as most of us have found out, but dried mushrooms are a completely different ingredient. They have more depth, more umami, a lot more versatility, and fresh mushrooms go bad very quickly, where dried mushrooms can stay in the pantry for years, maybe. You see a similar idea in food improvement and drying as a food improvement method in Italian and Chinese cuisine, especially when it comes to seafood. So drying things like tuna, fish roe, scallops, shrimp, abalone, even small fish. It's not just about preservation and moving things inland. It's about building flavor. As those ingredients dry, their umami compounds, so that savory kind of rich flavor, they actually concentrate, sometimes dramatically, and they take on the kind of depth that you don't get when they're fresh. So dried scallops, for example, are used almost like a seasoning, rehydrated and shredded into broths, sauces, or stir-fries to add richness and complexity. While something like batarga, which is an Italian product consisting of egg roe sacs from gray mullet, They get cured, dried, and then it's almost like just a solid block of wood, these fish eggs, and then they're grated over pasta like Parmesan cheese. And the flavor is super intense and really, really delicious. It's like a very expensive, high quality product there. These are both really good examples of drying, not just as a storage method, but as a deliberate culinary technique, which is where I think it gets really interesting. So if you're thinking in terms of wild food, this becomes really important. You often have the abundance in short windows, whether that's a successful hunt or, a big forage, like a big find of mushrooms or something. And drying is a way to stretch that moment across weeks, months, or even years. But all that only works because of what's happening at a scientific level, which we'll talk about next. So what's actually going on when we dry food, Justin?
Well, funny you should ask, Adam. At the core of all this is something called water activity. That's not just how much water is in the food, but how much of that water is actually available for microbes to use. Bacteria, mold, yeast, each one of them needs water to grow and to reproduce. So when you dry food, you're lowering that availability. You're not necessarily killing those microbes. You're just making the environment one where they can't function. And this is actually pretty common when we look throughout preservation techniques. We see it in salting, we see it in the use of acid, all these things like this. That's really important, though, as we look at this whole thing holistically, because drying doesn't sterilize food, it stabilizes it. And how effective that is depends on a few things working together. Temperatures helps drive moisture out, airflow carries that moisture away, and the surface area plays a huge role. That's why thin slices dry better than thick cuts, and why something like jerky works so well. On a cellular level, what's happening is pretty straightforward, but definitely fascinating, I'd say. As moisture leaves the food, water is pulled out of the individual cells, which causes them to shrink and then collapse. That's why dehydrated foods get smaller and denser. It's because the structure literally tightens as the internal water is being removed. At the same time, you're seeing the changes in color. Some of that is simple concentration. Pigments become more intense as water leaves, but there are also chemical reactions happening, like enzymatic browning and mild oxidation. We see this especially in fruits and vegetables, and I've seen it in meats too. So, what you end up with is something that's not just drier, but physically and visually transformed. From a cooking standpoint, though, when you bring it to the kitchen, that's where the magic really is. You're concentrating not just the structure, but the flavor as well. You also see big differences depending on the food itself. Lean meats dry efficiently, while fatty meats can be problematic. Mushrooms, which are mostly water, transform dramatically. Berries, with their sugar content, behave a little differently too. So, once you understand the balance, remember heat, airflow, and moisture, you can start to apply it in a lot of different ways. Adam, how are people actually doing this today?
Yeah, so it's changed since the Stone Age, where it was just kind of potentially a haphazard kind of thing. If you're hoping that the outdoor temperature and humidity and everything all work to your advantage, we have a little more control nowadays. When it comes to actually drying food, there's a pretty wide range of options for us, from really simple setups to some fairly serious equipment that's going to set you back some money. Most people are just going to start with an electric dehydrator, kind of the modern baseline for dehydrating foods and drying foods. It's something I use on a regular basis. With that, you're controlling temperature, airflow, and time, which takes a lot of guesswork out of it, doing it just hanging outside. On the lower end, you're usually looking for something in the $50 to $100 range. These are typically those kind of round, stackable dehydrator units made out of plastic. Sometimes there's older ones that will last forever, newer ones that will fall apart on you, basically, like everything else in the world. But they work. They're accessible. They're great for things like mushrooms, herbs, fruit. You can make jerky with it. They're pretty inexpensive. The trade-off is that the airflow isn't always even, so you often need to rotate your trays and everything to get more consistent results. You can often find those things in a thrift store for $15. So if money is something that's kind of stopping you from doing it, Get up to the thrift stores, talk around, look on Marketplace, whatever. You'll probably find one for pretty cheap. For more consistent results, though, you might want to move into the mid-tier range, say $150 to $300 or so. That's when you start getting better airflow, more consistent drying, and just more control in general. That's where dehydrating meat becomes a lot more reliable, especially if you enjoy doing jerky regularly. And what's happening is those units have, they're usually more of like a microwave looking thing, big door, lots of racks, better airflow and everything, and you're paying for that. On the higher end, you've got larger, more commercial style units that can run anywhere from 400 to 1,000 or even more. These are more built for volume, so multiple trays, really strong fans, even drying. If you're like regularly processing whole animals in a jerky or dehydrating huge mushroom hulls that you find, in burn sites out west or something, that's probably the only time those are really going to start making sense. For just your regular hunter who brings in a couple animals a year, you probably don't need anything like that. And then there's kind of the next level up from that even, which is freeze drying. And that's a completely different category. Home freeze dryer is usually going to run you somewhere around $3,000 to $5,000 depending on size, and even more if you want to go bigger for like an industrial unit. It's a totally different process than regular dehydration. Instead of using just heat and airflow, you're also freezing the food and then pulling the moisture out through a vacuum, and that turns ice directly into vapor. So it's incredibly effective, the food coming out of it has a really long shelf life, great texture retention, but it's also a really big investment, both in cost and time, as they run generally for more than $3,000 each. For some more information about freeze drying at home, let's turn it over to an expert.
The goal of freeze drying is to make all sorts of food shelf stable by removing its water content without harming the structure of the food. So what is freeze drying? Well, let's start with water. 4.5 billion years ago, when the oceans were just forming, okay, maybe that's a little too far back. But we do actually need to talk about water to understand freeze drying. Water can exist in 3 states: liquid, frozen, or gaseous. And you can change the state of water by adjusting its temperature. If you were to raise the temperature on food, the water content in that food would turn to gas and evaporate. This is how you dehydrate or dry food. And if you were to lower the temperature, you would freeze the food, making the water content turn solid. So how does freeze drying work? The temperature at which water turns to vapor depends on atmospheric pressure. The lower the pressure is, the lower the temperature required to boil or evaporate water. So if we were to put some water in a vacuum, we could lower the evaporation point to below the freezing point, causing the water to turn directly from a solid to a vapor. This is called sublimation. So in order to freeze dry, we first freeze food, then put it in a vacuum. Then as we raise the temperature on the food while maintaining the vacuum, the ice molecules inside the food will instantly turn to vapor. So calling it freeze drying makes sense because you're drying something from a frozen state. Ideally, when the whole process is done, the food should be left with less than 4% water content, but most often gets down to less than 1. In its freeze-dried state, food will typically keep its physical structure as well as its nutritional value for a possible 30 plus years, making it an ideal method for food preservation.
Now, for most people, a normal dehydrator is going to get you pretty much 90% of the way there. If you don't have a dehydrator, your oven can actually absolutely work as well. You just need to be a bit more deliberate about it. You're aiming for low temperatures, generally somewhere around 140 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to keep the door slightly ajar or cracked open to let moisture escape. Otherwise, you're just kind of steaming the food inside the oven. Some newer ovens actually even have dehydration settings, so you can use those as well. So that's a possibility. There's lots of information online if you want to go that route, although it's not going to be quite as good as just a normal dehydrator and uses a lot more energy. However, you plan on drying your food, how you prep things matters a lot. You want thin, even cuts so everything dries at the same time. So for meat, that usually means slicing against the grain, fairly thin. Although some jerkies work best with, cut with the grain, but let's not get into semantics. For vegetables or fruit, uniform slices or pieces works better than just throwing whole fruit in there. And also when you lay things out in your dehydrator, you want lots of space. So no overlapping, no piling. You need that air to move around everything, even if it's in the oven. If you crowd it, you're going to trap moisture and slow everything down and probably end up with uneven results. So if you want to get even more basic from there, we can go right to the back to the beginning and go super traditional. And that's just air drying. And air drying is probably what a lot of people picture, just hanging strips of meat, drying fish on racks, stringing mushrooms up. It works, but it's completely dependent on your environment. So if it's humid, it's going to be slow or potentially risky. If you got insects around, you need to protect your food from it. So, it's simple, but it's not actually always forgiving. You have sometimes like a wood stove. If you have a wood stove in the winter hanging over things, it creates a very dry, kind of warm environment with lots of airflow. That's often your best bet. If you're just hanging outside and you're living in a super humid region, it's not going to work out for you. So sticking with the kind of basic themes, sun and solar drying are also kind of an extension of that. They work best in dry climates where you've got consistent heat, low humidity. Solar dehydrator is basically a simple screened-in box of frame that uses the sun's heat to warm the air and then relies on airflow to carry the moisture away. You can actually build one really easily. At its simplest, it's just basically a wooden box or frame with mesh trays inside, a clear panel or lid to let sunlight in. So usually you can use glass or plexiglass, and then vents at the bottom and top. So cool air enters low, warms up in the sun, passes over the food, and exits at the top, carrying moisture with it. You can encase it in some fine mesh or screening, and then you've also got protection from insects. So it's a much better, more controlled way than just hanging. It's low tech, but in the right conditions, it works really, really well. And then lastly, there are some interesting kind of hybrid approaches. Jerky is probably the best example. In the Andes, in like the Peruvian area, they take advantage of natural freeze-thaw cycles. So meat freezes overnight in icy cold temperatures, then dries during the day in the sun and wind. So you're combining freezing and drying into one process and letting the environment do most of the work. And honestly, a trip to Peru might just be a little cheaper than a freeze dryer, a home freeze dryer, so maybe that's worth taking the trip. You might also recognize that word jerky. It sounds a lot like jerky, and there's a reason for that. It's because jerky is named after Turkey, which is the original jerky, apparently. So to sum it all up, whether you're using a $50 dehydrator, a full $10,000 freeze-drying system, or just air and sunlight, the principles here are the same. You're looking at heat, airflow, and time. But how well you manage those is what kind of determines whether you end up with something really shelf-stable and delicious or something that you just probably shouldn't eat.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
You don't wash your jersey during a win streak. You don't switch seats when your team's up big. And you definitely don't shave during the playoffs. When things are working, you don't change them. That's why when you drink Jägermeister, you drink it ice cold. Anything else? Well, that'd just be bad luck. Drink it cold or don't drink it at all. Jägermeister. Damn, that's cold. Drink responsibly. Jägermeister liqueur, 35% alcohol by volume. Imported by Mast Jägermeister, U.S. White Plains, New York.
This point is where people need to be a little more careful. With meat, especially, you have to remember that drying doesn't kill the pathogens, as I mentioned earlier. They're there to begin with, and they can still be there after drying. That's why temperature matters, particularly with things like jerky. You want to make sure you're hitting safe ranges so you're not just preserving something unsafe. Fat is also another big factor. Fat doesn't really dry. Instead, it oxidizes, and that leads to rancidity. That's why we talk about removing all the fat from bear and venison and things before you put them in the freezer. That way the fat doesn't go bad. And that's why lean cuts are always recommended for jerky and why certain types of wild game need a bit more thought. Moisture, it's another big one, right? So if something looks dry on the outside but still holds moisture inside, you're creating a situation where mold can develop over time. And that's where thin slicing, airflow, and patience really matter. And then there's storage. Even perfectly dried food can go bad if it's exposed to air, light, or heat. Airtight containers, cool temperature, dark storage go a long way. Vacuum sealing helps even more. And for me, too, another thing is just the general humidity. We don't talk about this a lot, but in places in the southern part of the United States or maybe remote island archipelagic regions like Hawaii, where I live, it's pretty humid all the time. As a matter of fact, the other day we bought a stale loaf of bread off the discount bin at the grocery store, which was all hard and crusty. Brought it home, put it in the bread box, and after about, 3 or 4 hours, it was soft again, which is very interesting because it pulls the moisture. And the difference being the grocery store has air conditioning and circulation. We just have natural air in our house that comes in and out from outside. So big concern too. You don't want to leave your freshly dried jerky out on the counter because it's going to pull in that moisture and try to resume its normal form. So you have to think about that as well when you're drying too, because that may take some extra time. But none of this is meant to scare people off from this technique. It just means that you need to approach the drying with a bit of intention. So let's hear from an expert on food drying safety. They're from the Arizona Department of Health Services.
Hi, cottage food entrepreneurs. Dehydrating and freeze drying are some of the most effective ways to preserve food. When done safely, they can keep your products shelf stable and delicious, and your customers safe. Today, we'll cover the basics of dehydrating and freeze drying. Dried foods include jerky, beans, fruits, vegetables, pasta, and more. If you're dehydrating meat or poultry, cook meat to 160 degrees Fahrenheit and poultry to 165 degrees Fahrenheit before dehydrating. This cooking step ensures harmful bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli are destroyed. This crucial step is needed because bacteria can survive dehydrating. To dehydrate after cooking, make sure to maintain a dehydrator temperature of 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit while drying. This temperature range ensures drying is fast enough to dry foods before they become unsafe, and it must remove enough water so that microorganisms are unable to multiply. Once dehydrated, store foods properly. Freeze drying is a great option for a wide variety of foods and is similar to regular freezing, but actually retains a higher nutritional content. Freeze drying preserves food by freezing it and then vacuum drying it to a very low moisture level. This method keeps your food lightweight, flavorful, and shelf stable for years. Freeze drying can preserve a wide variety of foods that need to be cooked, like meat and eggs, but they must be cooked to the proper temperature before freeze drying. Cook meat to 160 degrees Fahrenheit and poultry to 165 degrees Fahrenheit before freeze drying. It's important to know that freeze drying does not kill bacteria, it only makes them dormant. This is why it's important to always make sure to use safe food handling practices before and during freeze drying. Microorganisms can become active again once food is rehydrated. Vacuum packaging is safe for freeze-dried foods as long as the food is fully dried. Vacuum packaging is not a food safety process itself. In fact, removing oxygen from a package may increase the chance of botulism bacteria growing and producing toxin if the environment is moist. Remove oxygen carefully and consider oxygen absorbers to maintain quality. Dehydrating and freeze drying can extend your food's shelf life, preserve taste and nutrition, and make your products safer for customers. By following proper temperatures, cooking steps, the manufacturer's instructions, and packaging, you protect your food, your business, and your reputation.
So, that's a great bit of information. And so now, once you've done it safety, what are you actually getting out of it nutritionally? Adam, what you got?
Well, it's pretty interesting because drying actually concentrates everything. Calories, protein, minerals, a lot of them are all still there, just in a smaller, lighter package. That's why dried foods have always been so useful for travel and backcountry situations, because they often retain a lot of their nutrition. There are some trade-offs, however. You do lose certain vitamins, especially ones that are sensitive to heat and air. The texture changes quite a bit too. Things get, chewier, firmer, sometimes more intense. But in a lot of cases, that intensity is a benefit. Like I said, dried mushrooms are the perfect example. They're not just preserved, they're actually transformed into something that brings, a different kind of depth to a dish. Also, sun-dried mushrooms even soak in extra vitamin D, which they pass along to you when you eat them, which is really interesting. So even store-bought, white button, just your regular white button mushrooms, they're grown in the dark, which is why they're white. But if you set them in your windowsill, like just as fresh mushrooms for, the afternoon before you cook to supper, they'll actually absorb some vitamin D from the sun and pass it along to you. So it's pretty interesting. Drying food also changes how you eat. So dried foods tend to slow you down a little more. You're chewing more. Flavors linger longer and portions go further, which can be very helpful on like a backcountry hunting thing or a backcountry hiking trip where you just want to kind of trick your mind into feeling more satiated than not. That slow kind of chewing can help with that. But this is kind of where drying starts to connect back to some of the other preservation methods we talked about, as you can kind of cross over some techniques. Do you want to talk about that a bit, Justin?
When you start applying all of this that we've talked about, which is a lot, so I hope you're taking good notes, when you apply it to wild food, this is where drying really becomes one of the most useful tools in your kit. With wild game, jerky is usually the first place people go, and for good reason. I know lots of folks who, take their whole animal and they'll grind part of it and the rest they'll get prepared for jerky, and that's what they do with it. When you're looking for jerky overall, you're looking for lean, uniform muscles that slice cleanly and dry evenly. So look at those cuts, like the top round, the bottom round, the eye of round. Most of those coming from the hind leg. Those are all really, really good cuts. Backstrap can work too, though some people, including myself, would argue that you're probably going to enjoy that better fresh. And really the key is that there's low fat and a consistent grain that you can slice thin and get even drying on. That's why you look towards those cuts at the back of the animal, those big, large muscle cuts, uniform grain. Even the backstrap, though in sections of it will have uniformity in the grain, it tends to change depending on if you're at the fore end or the aft end of the animal. And then once you start working with fattier trim, you'll run into shelf life issues pretty quickly. So that's why you got to make sure that you trim everything really, really well. And ironically, the leaner the meat, the better the jerky. So let's bump over to fish. Fish opens up a whole different set of possibilities, especially if you're dealing with freshwater species. Leaner fish tend to dry better. Fish like walleye, perch, pike, and trout, if you manage the fat properly. You'll often see these split, lightly salted, and air-dried or smoked and then dried. The texture changes a lot, but that's part of the appeal. It becomes something you can store, travel with, and use in completely different ways that you wouldn't be able to get out of fresh fish. So moving on to the foraging world, mushrooms might be one of the best arguments for drying anything at all. Morels, porcini, boletes, those don't just hold up to drying, they actually improve. The flavor concentrates, the aroma deepens, and when you rehydrate them, you've got something incredibly versatile. Not to mention the resulting mushroom stock that you get as a byproduct, that liquid that doesn't get absorbed but still passes some of that flavor off. That's great to add to your sauces, your rice, your cooking stock, whatever. Like, that gives some extra flavor in that you're going to want to keep. On the flip side, though, there are mushrooms that don't benefit as much from drying. Chanterelles are a good example. They can be dried, but they tend to lose a lot of their character and texture. They're usually better fresh or preserved in other ways. So, ironically, the plant world and the meat world tend to kind of interact in the same ways. There's some things that are better for drying and some things that are not. If you look back at history, look back at common expert recipes, you're going to find that there's some common themes running there that people have fine-tuned and figured out this drying thing a lot. But one of the most useful things you can do with dried mushrooms is you can take them a step further and make them into a powder. Once you've got that, it becomes a seasoning, and you can add it to soups, sauces, stews. You can even use it as part of a dry rub on meat. It's basically a concentrated hit of umami that you can apply wherever you want. And it's not just the mushrooms. Think about roots like dandelion or chicory can be dried, roasted, ground into coffee substitutes, or blended into coffee for a deeper, earthier flavor. So my tribe, the Choctaw, taught a lot of the arriving French in the southeast part of the United States how to mix coffee or chicory into the coffee, and that's how you end up with like the Café du Monde, famous brand down in Louisiana, is a result of combining that chicory in with the coffee to get that really, really dark black drink. There's also things like rose hips, herbs, and flowers that can be dehydrated for teas or for seasonings as well. Berries are another big category. You can dry them for teas, for trail mixes, or even just to eat them out of your hand. Grapes into raisins are the obvious example, but you can do the same with a lot of wild berries depending on the sugar content. They become more portable, more shelf-stable, and in some cases, more versatile. Fruits like apple, plum, pear, those all make great candidates for dehydrated trail snacks. You can also take fruit in a different direction and make things like fruit leathers, where you're pureeing and drying it out into sheets. And that's a slightly different process, but it's still rooted in the same idea, removing moisture to preserve and transform. I think one of the coolest things I saw is there was somebody on Instagram. They had like a binder, and it was all their different dehydrated like sauces and fruits and stuff, and they would like pull it out and throw it into the pot with the water and rehydrate it, and they would have like this fully shelf stable thing. It's really, really cool.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it can just end up in the back of your pantry if you don't use it right away.
Another thing is there's the concept of dried ingredients as flavoring agents, which this shows up in, I think every cuisine. If you look at, ground black pepper or, ground garlic granules. But another one is really cool is in Persian cooking. It's a great example where dried mulberries, barberries, and other fruits are used to add brightness and contrast to dishes. Juniper berries are another one. Technically not berries in the way that we usually think about them, but dried and used for their aromatic qualities. These pair especially with game. I've used them in bacon recipes and jerky recipes, all kinds of stuff. Juniper, great pairing. So drying, it's not just about making food last longer. It's about expanding what food can become. And you're not just preserving the ingredients, you're creating new ones. And once you start thinking about it that way, even something simple like jerky or dried mushrooms becomes a lot more interesting. And I'm imagining you're probably going to find it more in your own wild pantry than you would normally.
Yeah, definitely. And even think something like jerky, which is just so great to eat out of hand, that can be its own ingredient too. If you think of what's the Mexican, is it machacha? I'm drawing a blank now. Ooh. Like kind of dried meat, like pounded, it can be used as an ingredient. You can reconstitute jerky into stews for a different flavor. You can, there's all sorts of kind of interesting things you can do with this stuff too. So changing that seca. Okay, there we go. We're changing that mindset in transforming the ingredients you find in the wild into actual condiments and flavor enhancers. It's kind of a next step in wild cooking, which is a lot of fun. But if you're looking for a place to start, especially hunters, jerky is probably the easiest entry point. It's something I made a whole bunch of times. It's pretty easy to make. You can really go any direction you want with the flavoring, which is pretty cool. You can make it spicy as hell or nice and sweet or whatever you prefer. So what you're going to do just for your basic is going to take, say, venison, we'll start out with. Slice it very thin, ideally against the grain. Make a simple marinade of soy sauce, garlic, and black pepper, and that'll go a long way. Maybe just a touch of maple syrup or sugar if you want a little sweetness to balance. And then dry it out around 70 degrees Celsius or 106 degrees Fahrenheit until it's firm but still slightly pliable. So you don't want it to snap into two when you bend it, but you want it to be kind of still quite dry, just not snapping all the way. That's usually how you can tell. Just a little bit of pliableness. One thing to keep in mind with jerky is that the time is more of a guideline than a rule. So in recipes that give you certain amounts of times, don't follow those exactly, because in most dehydrators, you're usually looking at somewhere in the range of about 4 to 8 hours. Depending on how thick you sliced it, how much moisture you started with, the strength of your dehydrator, the relative humidity in your house. There's all these different things. So don't go by time, go by feeling. And if you've had jerky before, you should know kind of how it feels, right? That texture really matters. You're looking for something that's dry to the touch, slightly leathery. When you bend it, it should maybe crack a little bit, but it's not snap clean in half, like I said. If it's that brittle, you've gone too far. If it's soft or spongy, it needs more time. And if you have gone too far, not the end of the world, you just get some dry ass jerky and it's fine. I still eat it. You could also rehydrate it into a stew or something. These dehydration products tend to be quite simple processes, but they do open up a lot of possibilities. Like I said, with just the flavors in alone you could add, or the types of meat you could do, goose jerky or deer jerky or whatever. There's just so many possibilities. Do you have any specific recipes, Justin, you want to talk about for drying meat?
I do. And I was actually, what I was thinking about, you struck a creative chord in the conversation there, is that we should come up with a recipe of like using the dried meats, like reconstituting it in like a super stew. Would be really cool, because
I've always wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, we always talk about jerky as a snack, but never as like something to kind of like rehydrate, right? So first off, let's pick one. So we're gonna have a little bit of a mix here. So I've got one off the Harvest Nature website, and it's Lone Star Jerky. And for those that don't know, Lone Star it's a beer from Texas. It's quite lovely beer. It's like a good budget beer, but it's definitely has its identity in the Lone Star state, and primarily that's where you're gonna find it. So for this recipe, you can substitute any kind of beer. So this recipe comes from one of our field staff writers, one of my good buddies, AJ Fick. AJ, if you're listening, good jerky. But what you're going to need for this is 2 pounds of venison roast. And so what I mentioned earlier of like look towards the hind quarter for those roast. 12 ounces of beer, 3/4 cup brown sugar, 2/3 cup soy sauce, some Worcestershire sauce or Worcestershire. I don't know. I can't say it right. But 4 cloves of garlic, a tablespoon of A1 sauce. That's optional. And then you want to do a teaspoon of ground black pepper and some cayenne, depending on your heat level. Make sure that you're cutting about 1/8 inch slices across the grain. Cutting with the grain will give you chewer jerky if you like that, but I probably would go across the grain. You're going to mix all the ingredients together, marinate your stuff in whatever type of dish you have, and then put it in the refrigerator for 12 to 18 hours or so. And after that, you're going to throw them in the dehydrator and let it go till it's done. It's really that simple. That's it, just like Adam mentioned. But that's a great one you can do with some beer. You can sub out the beer for whiskey. You can do really whatever. I know. What do you got, Adam? You got another one here?
Yeah, actually, to move away from meat a little bit, I've got a trout jerky, actually, that I've made. So you don't have to go with red meat if you don't want to. You can make jerky out of pretty much anything. So this one uses trout, and I think they were lake trout that I used for this one. So I just basically took the skin off, cut it into long strips. If you're looking at from the tail to the head, that's kind of the way the strips are going. And then I cover them in maple syrup, some whiskey, which is always really nice, soy sauce, brown sugar, Worcestershire sauce, is that how you say it? And liquid smoke. And then lots of black pepper. I'm going to soak everything in there for a while, let it marinate, and then I'm going to put it onto dehydrator racks. I just have those like simple plastic circle ones. Dehydrate it until it's nice and chewy, and it goes fast. So make sure you make a lot. And it's kind of, I don't know if you've ever had salmon candy. It's like a West Coast kind of indigenous treat. It comes out very similar to that. That's basically just like smoked salmon with maple syrup or different sugars. It's kind of like that, but a little more jerky-ish. Delicious. It's on theintrepiddeer.com, so I recommend you try that out. I got a nice little video for you there too.
Sweet. We love videos. I've got another one. So if you want to deviate a bit from some standard cuts, right, off the hindquarter there when we're talking about meat jerky, we could do heart jerky too, which is always really, really interesting. So you're going to want to have like a good, clean, not shot up heart. And you're going to want to trim off all the connective tissue away from the heart. And this is really important because that's not going to go as well in the drying process. You're going to end up with like really chewy unbiteable pieces. But then you're going to want to have your kind of chunks of heart at the end and slice them into 1/4 inch strips. It doesn't matter in this recipe if you go against the grain or with the grain, because it's just the heart. It behaves a little differently other than the other muscles. So for this, your marinade can really be whatever you feel like. I think probably a great thing is Worcestershire sauce, which seems to be a common theme here. Adobo, which is a great all-in-one seasoning mix. Ground pepper, honey, smashed garlic cloves, maybe chili oil. You could put some other stuff in there, like a little acid, maybe some vinegar or something like that would be cool. But essentially, you're going to follow the same process, just a different muscle. And then really, you want to set your dehydrator temperature to about 160, 175, and probably 10 to 12 hours of cooking. You could also put it on the smoker if your smoker gets down to that same temperature, and you could have like a nice smoked jerky. You could also smoke your jerky a little bit on the smoker and then put it in the dehydrator if you wanted like kind of a smokier flavor. I tend to try to stay away from liquid smoke, but that's always an option, I guess, if you want to play with that. Some people really like that kind of like artificial hickory flavor that liquid smoke gives. But in the end of the day, you can probably recreate that on your own using actual smoke. And I've been seeing a lot of advertisements for like cold smokers as like attachments or little things to, to start to add some smoke flavor into things. So that's a good one. But one thing we haven't talked about yet, we talked a little bit about it and Adam talked some techniques and stuff, but like, could you dive a little deeper into like drying mushrooms?
Yeah, sure. That's something I do a lot at home because I end up, finding these huge hauls of mushrooms and then not being able to get through them all the way. So then I start trying to preserve them, and drying is one way I definitely go. So, in the late summer, early fall, the dehydrator is basically running 24/7 in our house and stinking up the house like mushrooms. But I really find that Swillis and boletes and those kind of big juicier mushrooms are actually pretty good for dehydrating. And some of the ones that don't even taste great, I'm thinking like chicken fat Swillis, something that people find a lot. It's kind of a slippery jack, I think they're also called. I don't love the flavor when they're fresh, but when I dry them out and use them just in like stews, they actually add a lot. And if you grind it down further using a coffee grinder, a spice grinder or something into powder, like we said, that gives you lots of good like kind of just umami hit for anything. I find that, black trumpets, morels, lobsters, all these things work really well. Even puffball mushrooms, sliced thin, dehydrated, and broken down to like a powder. It's great. You can make your own kind of umami powder using like dehydrated seaweed and dehydrated mushrooms and kind of make your own cool MSG powder with it. But basically for small mushrooms like small morels or black trumpets or those kind of things, you can just dehydrate the mushroom whole. But anything larger, you're often going to want to slice it. That also helps you find any bugs that could potentially be in it. Slice them and then lay them out, give them lots of space, dry them low and slow so you don't kind of cook them, make them too crispy. And then all you got to do is when you're getting ready to cook, boil a little bit of water, pour it into a bowl, throw your dried mushrooms in there, let them reconstitute for 15 minutes, half an hour, and then you got mushrooms to cook with. So and they honestly last for a long time. I've kept a couple for 2 or 3 years, which might not be great, but I still got to them and they were just perfectly fine. So just keep in mind that mushrooms have a lot of water in them, so drying them whole could be difficult. So just slice. And then stay away from some of the, there's a few mushrooms, like we said, chanterelles. You can dry them and it works just fine, but they're going to lose some of that kind of special apricot-y fragrance that kind of makes them awesome. They kind of lose it. So, if you're wondering, you can ask one of us or go online, and there's lots of information out there about which mushrooms are best to dry and which aren't. So, I tend to really rely on that a lot. And then anything else too, like if you're pulling in like a huge haul of say rose hips or something, you can just throw those right into the dehydrator, dry them out, make tea out of them. There's lots and lots of options. So yeah, if you guys have any more questions about that, feel free to write in and ask. Do you use a dehydrator at home, Justin?
I do. I have a dehydrator at home. I use it. I've also used a smoker as well. I think really good options if you're going to go with it. I mean, you can also do the oven too if you can get oven temperatures low enough. I've heard of people cracking their oven too to like help regulate the temperature, not cracking physically like cracking the door open in order to regulate temperatures. Just be careful with if it's gas or electric and how you're handling that, because you could get some wonky things in there. But also I wanted to discuss one other recipe, and this came out of, I just picked up a copy of Kimmy Werner's new cookbook, Kimmy's Kitchen. Nice. And it's got a lovely mix of wild fish, wild game, lots of cool recipes with great stories and stuff behind it from her. But she's got a cool cured and smoked fish recipe in here that's a saltwater fish. So if you haven't got this book, you should go pick it up. She's pretty awesome. Made a great impact in the spearing and hunting world out here in Hawaii and just kind of writ large. You'll see her on Meat Eater and other places. But either way, food's phenomenal. But she has a cool one. It uses, you can use like yellow fin tuna, so ahi, so different types of tuna you could sub in for this, or other kind of like that deep red dark meat fish you find saltwater. Sugar, sea salt, ground black pepper, and just kind of like very simple, straightforward recipe. So you could sub that out. Also, ahi jerky and different types of fish jerky are very common here in Hawaii, so it's cool to see that come through. But if you want to get the full recipe on that one, go pick up her book. It's a great resource to have. I'm excited to flip through mine. I literally just got it in the mail a couple days ago, and I had to flip through it while Adam was talking in order to find the recipe, because I knew there was one in there I wanted to talk about. So go check that book out. It's really, really great, and that's a cool recipe. Also, another alternative to just freshwater fish if you're living on the coast, or if you're like, hey, you know what, there's some discount wild tuna for sale at the grocery store, and maybe I'll just make some and have it in my pantry for a delicious snack. So, but yeah, man, what a great conversation about drying. I'm excited. This is a good one. So, as it is one of the oldest tools in our human food kit, it's not there because it's easy, because sometimes we do have to face our own challenges, but it has worked out well, and you can see that through its expansive use and time, and it still works. As a matter of fact, we've probably shaped it to be a little more efficient throughout time with the use of dehydrators, as Adam mentioned, the use of freeze dryers, as we talked about, and sort of just like all the different techniques to really try to eliminate that kind of unsafe part of it and bring it back into something where every person can do it. So whether it's a successful hunt, a basket of mushrooms, or a handful of wild berries, I think drying still leans its way as one of the most efficient ways to carry the landscape with you even after the season ends. So with that, we'll see you next time on the Wild Pantry. We'll be talking about something even more fun and kind of in the realm of a little bit of drying, but a little different, but hot and cold smoking. Thanks everybody for listening. Punch that 5-star button, leave us a review, tell us we're doing right, or tell us that you don't like dried mushrooms and Adam will unfriend you. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.